Welcome to the Project Management PrepCast, helping you prepare for the PMP exam. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome back to the Project Management PrepCast. We group the information covered in the PMBOK guide into lovely lessons to increase your knowledge for the PMP exam. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. In this lesson, we cover in greater detail both the process groups and knowledge areas that are presented to you in the PMBOK guide. The PMBOK guide describes project management processes in terms of the integration between all of the processes as well as their interactions and the purpose that they serve. To help aspiring PMPs better understand these relationships, these processes are organized in terms of 5 process groups and 10 knowledge areas. So, in this lesson, we'll give you detailed information on the 5 process groups, how each process group is iterative. We'll look at some project information as well. We look at the role of the 10 knowledge areas and the process interactions on all our projects. Project management processes are placed into 5 specific groups based on their overall function. They are guides for applying the appropriate project management knowledge and skills during the project. Following the process groups leads to a much higher success rate than just playing it by ear, crossing your fingers, and hoping for the best on your projects. A process group has clear dependencies on other process groups. The output of one process group is often the input for another process group, and we will cover these process group interactions as well in just a moment. The 5 process groups are independent of application areas or industry focus. You will find each of the 5 process groups active in all sorts of projects, in everything from construction to IT. No matter what industry you are managing projects in, you will always need to initiate, plan, execute, monitor and control, and close. Always. An important thing to note is that the process groups are not the same as project life cycle phases, and in addition, all process groups could be conducted in each phase of a project. In the previous lesson of this module on project management processes, we discussed the process groups briefly. Do you remember what the 5 process groups are called? Well, when you look at the picture here, you get some kind of an idea. They are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling. The word controlling is actually missing here on that image. And lastly, closing as well. Well, let's go further into detail. The application of the project management processes is iterative, and many processes are repeated during the project, as you can see here with the start of a phase and the end of a phase going from left to right, and our process groups are in the center. You'll see initiating, planning, executing, and closing, sort of the dark gray in the foreground, and sort of lighter gray in the background, monitoring and closing process group. This is necessary since monitoring and controlling process groups, they occur at the same time as all the other 4 process groups. They're sort of overlaying. They're contained within the other process groups. The monitoring and controlling processes are therefore shown here sort of as the background behind the others because it's happening at the same time. We'll get to the process groups interactions in just a bit, but right now let's look at each process group one by one. Initiating is defined in the PMBOK guide as those processes performed to define a new project or a new phase of an existing project by obtaining authorization to start the project or phase. In this process group, the scope is defined. Initial financial resources are committed to. Internal and external stakeholders are identified, those who will interact and influence the overall outcome of the project. If the project manager has not yet been selected, then he or she should be chosen in this process group. Would be a good idea. At the latest, he or she should be chosen in the next process group in planning, but it's always best to assign them here during initiation. Once the project charter, which contains all of the information that we gather in initiating alongside the stakeholder register, is approved, then the project is officially approved and work can begin. The key purpose of the initiating process group is to align stakeholder expectations with the project's purpose. It also helps to set the vision of the project, which is what is needed to be accomplished. Planning is defined in the PMBOK guide as those processes required to establish the scope of the project, refine the objectives, and define the course of action required to attain the objectives that the project was undertaken to achieve. What is a sure sign that your project is going to fail even before it starts? Well, skipping the planning processes. Many people try to skip planning thinking that it's just paperwork and creation of all of these plans. There's way too much bureaucracy. Nothing could be further from the truth. Without a plan, your project will effectively be flying blind. And as the old saying goes, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. The planning processes develop the project management plan and the project documents that will be used to carry out the project. These outputs are key to your project and will be referenced throughout the project's life cycle. Don't skip this step. The key benefit of the planning process group is to determine the strategy and tactics that will be used in your project, as well as the course of action that your project will follow on its way to success. The executing process group contains those processes that are performed to complete the work defined in the project management plan to satisfy the project specifications. Executing is all about coordinating people and resources. The executing process group is where the work gets done, and you will spend the majority of your time in this process group here. Executing is also the process group where you will manage stakeholder expectations. Results may need to be communicated, or you may need to re-baseline. This could include changing the expected activity durations, changing resource availabilities or productivity, or even unforeseen risks that need to be handled. Stakeholders need to be informed and their expectations have to be updated with all of this new information. Integrating and performing activities is a big part of this process group as well. When you perform the activities in your project starts to produce deliverables. The monitoring and controlling process group includes those processes that are required to track, review, and regulate the progress and performance of the project, identify any areas in which changes to the plan are required, and initiate the corresponding changes. This is where you as the project manager measure and analyze the performance of your project. Without monitoring and controlling your project, you will just run out of control and you'll probably run behind schedule and you'll go over budget. Take the information you get when you measure and analyze performance and identify the variances, if you have any. If your project is running behind schedule, you can try various things like fast tracking or crashing to get back on track. We'll cover these methods in our project time management lessons. Monitoring and controlling is a process group that is continuous. It is always occurring during your project. This is not a one-time process group where you get one performance report and then call it a day. Not at all. Consistent updates and information keep your project in control. Closing is the fifth and final process group, and it includes those processes performed to finalize all activities across all process groups to formally close the project or phase. In this process group, you as the project manager need to verify that the defined processes are completed. For instance, in this process group, you will close out all procurement activities for the project, ensure termination of all relevant agreements. This process group can also be used to formally finalize a prematurely closed project. Prematurely closed projects that may need this could include cancelled projects or projects that faced a critical situation and had to finish. During the life cycle of a project, a large amount of information is created, analyzed, and distributed to team members and stakeholders. The appropriate terminology for the various information collected and distributed is, first of all, work performance data. These are the raw observations and measurements identified during activities that are being performed to carry out the project. Then we have work performance information. This is the performance data collected from various controlling processes, analyzed in context and integrated based on relationships across areas. And finally, work performance reports. This is the physical or electronic representation of work performance information compiled in project documents intended to generate decisions, actions, or awareness. The 47 processes identified in the PMBOK guide are grouped into separate knowledge areas. These 10 knowledge areas represent a complete set of concepts, terms, and activities that make up a specific field in project management, like project scope management, project time management, project risk management, and so on. The 10 knowledge areas are used on most projects most of the time. Everything is intertwined, overlaps, and interacts in reality. Just like no process group is an island unto itself, no knowledge area can accomplish the objectives of a project without interacting with the other knowledge areas. Success is found when you use all the tools at your disposal to the fullest extent. Let us briefly take a look at this table 3-1 here from the PMBOK guide that contains a list of the 10 knowledge areas as well as how the processes in each knowledge area relate to the 5 process groups. Obviously, the table is much taller than what we can fit onto one slide here, so we cut it into 2 parts. This here is the top half. For example, let's look at project time management, the knowledge area. You'll notice that it has a lot of processes and almost all of them are in the planning process group. Note also the additional process for project time management in the monitoring and controlling process group. This shows us that after you are done planning your schedule, defining your activities, and so on, you still have to monitor and control your schedule to keep your project on track. And here is the bottom half of this table, and let's take a look at the project procurement management knowledge area and compare to the project time management knowledge area, which had the majority of its processes in planning. Project procurement management has processes in, well, almost every process group except initiation. This shows us that project procurement management is deeply woven into almost every process group, and that you will be working in this knowledge area in almost every part of your project. Project management process groups are linked by the outputs that they produce. The process groups are not one-time events. Rather, they are iterative and overlapping activities, as you can see here, that occur throughout the project. The output of one process group quite often becomes an input to another process, or is a deliverable of the project. For example, the initiating process group provides the planning process groups with the project charter. Another example would be that the planning process group provides the executing process group with the project management plan and the project documents. And a third example would be that the executing processes provide the monitoring and controlling process with project deliverables. As you can see, the process groups interact and overlap at various times and are deeply intertwined with each other. If a project is broken down into separate phases, then each of these process groups will be present in each phase, interacting with each phase as needed to accomplish the project's objectives. You've already seen this figure here about process interactions in the lesson on project management processes. Again, it's one we had to cut in half so it fits onto our screen. But in this lesson, I want to stress the importance of understanding the concept of process groups interacting with each other. No process group stands alone. Each process group contributes to the success of your project equally. There's a tendency in some circles to skip the initiating and planning process groups in order to save time. And I'm guilty of that sometimes. But sometimes pressure is such that upper management will press the project manager to just get it done, move on, go on, get something done out there without going through the processes in the initiating and planning process group. And that, of course, is a fatal error. Never skip a process group in order to get the project done faster. It may sound good in theory, but in reality, your project will fail. Let's review what we have learned in this lesson. There are 5 process groups which are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, as well as closing. There are 10 knowledge areas, and they are integration, scope, time, cost, quality, human resources, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder management. And each of these 10 has its own separate module as lessons here on the Project Management PrepCast. The process groups interact and overlap, and each of them interacts and works together to contribute to your project's success. And each process group has a purpose, and the PMBOK guide covers each one for a reason. They are all important. Here is a relatively easy PMP exam sample question that you may find in a book or online, but if you've listened closely to this lesson, it'll be easy for you to answer this one. When should you skip a process group? Is it A, when your project is behind schedule? B, when your project has a small budget? C, when you have limited resources? Or D, never? What do you think? Well, the answer is, of course, D. Never skip a process group, even if you think it will save time or money, or from pressure by upper management. And with that, we have come to the end of this lesson on process groups and knowledge areas. So it's time for us to say farewell. Justine?
Good night, John Boy.
No, Justine, farewell.
Keep on trucking.
Farewell.
Farewell.
Thank you. Until next time.